The servicemen and women on the ground in a war zone are really the only ones that know what it feels like to be in the heat of battle. But Sebastian Junger comes close. He followed a platoon in Afghanistan over more than a year, and now his bestseller, War, is out in paperback.
And Sebastian joins us to talk about that and several things surrounding the war in Afghanistan and some other issues. Welcome. We appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Let's first talk about the book itself, War. It's now a bestseller hardback, and you have it now in paperback. For folks who haven't gotten to read it yet, just give us the thumbnail sketch of what you tried to accomplish.
Well, I've covered wars for years, since 1993. I'd been in Afghanistan starting in 96. And war is, it's a terrible trauma for society, and it's becomes a very political thing. And that's usually how I've covered it. But in this case, what I wanted to do was break away from that and really enter the reality of the soldier. And soldiers really do not talk about the political, the moral context of a war. They're just trying to fight it and survive it. And so I was with a platoon, about 30 men, of airborne infantry, U.S. airborne infantry, the battle company of the 173rd Airborne in a very remote valley in eastern Afghanistan called the Korangal Valley. And specifically, I was with 2nd Platoon up on a ridgetop position called Restrepo, OP Restrepo. There was no running water up there. The men didn't bathe for a month at a time. There was no internet. There was no phone. There was no cooked food. They slept on the ground at first. They finally built little plywood hooches that sort of clung to the side of the ridge. They hacked the outpost out of rock with pickaxes, and they were getting attacked sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. And I did a total of 5 one-month trips with them. I basically became part of the platoon, and I wrote a book called War because I was trying to understand the basic human experience of combat, which doesn't change much war to war. And the book is divided into 3 sections. The primary emotional experiences in combat: fear, killing, and love. And love, of course, is the bond within the platoon that makes all of this something a person can survive.
Most people don't know what it's like to be under attack in war. What is it like?
Well, it sort of depends. Like if you've got good cover, I mean, I hate to get tactical on you, but if you've got good cover and you're attacked and you're fighting back, it's a pretty stimulating experience. I mean, it is very exciting. You feel quite confident that you're going to be okay because you've got good cover. If the enemy doesn't have artillery, it's not that bad. What's absolutely terrifying is being attacked unexpectedly when you have no cover, and bullets are just sort of slapping the ground around you, and that is just psychologically excruciating. One of the problems with all this, of course, is that bullets do hit people sometimes, and they kill people. And if you go to war, you come home grieving friends that you lost. It's like going to high school knowing absolutely for sure that you're going to lose 3 or 4 friends in car accidents before you graduate. Absolutely for sure it's going to happen. Good friends. And car accidents that you witnessed or maybe were even in the car when your friend died. I mean, that's the sort of civilian equivalent of what happens to these young guys. And despite all of that, they come back, and as bad as it was out there, a lot of them miss it. Like, they miss the war. And one of the things I tried to figure out with my book is to understand, so that civilians could understand it, like, what is it that young men get out of war? I mean, everyone understands how they're damaged by it, but no one really thinks about what they get out of it and why they miss it. And until we understand what they miss about war, we don't have a chance of providing some kind of reasonable substitute for that back home in our society where these people ultimately belong.
Is it something like an adrenaline junkie or an athlete who craves the competition?
Part of it, but you can get adrenaline, in society. You can rob banks, you can jump out of airplanes with parachutes. I mean, you can get adrenaline in society. What's particularly potent about war, about the experience of war, is that you're getting those adrenaline rushes in the context of something that you're doing in the context of a service for your country, and much more importantly than that, you are part of a brotherhood. You're doing that in a situation where your brothers need your courage, need your strength, and your actions in order to survive. So there's a clarity of purpose. There's a sense of utility and a clarity which is absolutely intoxicating. And there's a brotherhood. I mean, the brotherhood in the platoon is just incredibly powerful. As one of them said to me, there's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we'd all die for each other. So the emotional, the psychological security of being inside a group like that is very, very profound for someone who's 19, 20 years old. And then you bring him back to society where all of a sudden he's being judged not for whether he's a courageous, strong person or not, but whether you're good-looking or not, whether your dad's in jail or not. I mean, all these things that kids have no control over, suddenly that's how you're judged instead of by your sort of basic integrity as a person and as a soldier. And that is very confusing and frankly frightening for these guys. And they take one look at society, and then they look back at Restrepo, and they think, I know what makes sense. Restrepo makes sense. Society does not, and they go right back there.
It's hard on reporters, too. And in fact, you worked on the film Restrepo with Tim Hetherington, who was killed in Libya. What was that like for you?
Well, I got the phone call, maybe half an hour after he was killed, that he'd passed away, and I was in New York City, and I just went into shock, and I sort of wallowed around with these very, very, terrible, terrible emotions for weeks. I mean, I'd never really grieved someone before that I was really close to, and it was devastating. And I got a really interesting email from a Vietnam vet who I'd met a year ago, and he had met Tim, and he really liked our movie Restrepo, and he liked my book, and so he emailed me and he said, Sebastian, I'm so sorry about Tim, but I do have to say this to you. I hope it doesn't sound callous. That you guys, you and Tim, with your books and your movie, you got very, very close to understanding war, what it's about, what it's really about. He said, but you didn't get all the way. He said the core reality of war, the ultimate truth about war, isn't that you might die. The ultimate truth about war is that you will guarantee to lose your brothers. And he said, until today, in some ways, you didn't know the first thing about war. And now you've lost a brother, and now you know everything you need to know about it. And it was a really kind of profound insight, into, the ultimate truth about what war is. It means losing people you love.
We understand that you have decided not to return to at least Afghanistan and maybe not war reporting at all. Tell us the reason behind that decision.
Well, I sort of understood, I guess I understood what my wife goes through. I mean, what happened with Tim is what my wife fears every time I go away. And I'm 49, and I went through this terrible grief for Tim. And, Tim was, I loved him, and I met him a few years ago. He was a peer, I wasn't married to him. I didn't grow up with him. This is just a guy I met a few years ago, and already it was just devastating. For my wife, for my family, I can't even begin to imagine what it would be if I was lost. And, ultimately, if you love people, you don't want to hurt them. And so I was like, okay, I've done this for 20 years. Maybe it's time to find a different kind of challenge, doing something different. So I'm going to keep covering these stories, but there's not much. In some ways, there's not much information out at the front line. Guys with guns act like guys with guns pretty much everywhere, and they're not the story. In some ways, they're not the story. They're a product. They're a symptom, an effect of the real story. And the gears, the huge social, political gears that produce war, that put those young men out there on the front lines, those gears are turning somewhere else. And I think, at age almost 50, it might be time to sort of turn my attention to the real machinery behind all this.
Is there any final idea you would like people to think about?
We just have Memorial Day, and I guess what I would ask your listeners is, I would ask them to please, whatever your feelings about war, about these particular wars are, people have strong feelings about war, and they must have strong feelings, because war is a terrible thing, and it needs to get argued about. It needs to get wrestled over, or we'll enter into it too easily. But when it comes to the soldiers themselves, they all made a very honorable decision, which is to serve their country. And the vast majority do it with dignity and honor and courage. And when they come home, we really need to acknowledge their sacrifice and their efforts, absolutely regardless of how we feel about these particular wars. It's extremely important for our society to do that, to operate in a healthy way.
Sebastian, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.